He bought his childhood home after 30 years. The mirrors were cleaner than everything else inside. They didn't reflect the present. They remembered. His mother had left herself in the glass. Have you ever forgotten someone you were taught to erase? The keys were heavier than they should have been. Gary and Tove stood on the cracked driveway of Verath House, palm open, staring at the tarnished brass as though it belonged to someone else's life. The realtor, Sian Halm, her name already fading from his memory, had pressed them into his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Professional, cautious, the kind of smile people wear when they're about to leave you alone with something they wouldn't touch themselves. It's been empty a long time, she'd said, adjusting the folder under her arm, but it's structurally sound. Just needs attention. Garian had nodded. He hadn't told her he didn't care about the structure. He hadn't told her he was buying the house for reasons he couldn't name. Reasons that sat low in his chest like stones he'd swallowed as a child and never coughed up. Now she was walking back to her car, heels clicking against the pavement, and he was alone. The house loomed in front of him, pale yellow paint peeling in long strips, shutters hanging crooked, hedges overgrown into shapeless masses that clawed at the porch railing. It looked like a place time had forgotten, or a place that had been waiting. Garian tilted his head, squinting against the late afternoon light. The windows were clouded with dust and warped glass, the kind that bent the world just slightly, made everything inside look like it was underwater. He could see the outline of the entryway through the front door's window. A narrow hallway, a staircase climbing into shadow, and a mirror. Tall, ornate frame, positioned directly across from the door. He'd forgotten about that mirror. Behind him, Sien's car door shut with a soft thud. The engine turned over, purred to life. Garian didn't turn around. He listened to the sound of gravel crunching under tires, the low hum of the highway half a mile east, the rustle of leaves in the overgrown hedges. The air smelled like mildew and old wood and something faintly sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun. Some houses hold on to things, Sien had said just before handing him the keys. He hadn't asked what she meant. Now, standing at the foot of the porch steps, Gary and Tove realized he didn't want to know. The keys felt colder now, heavier, like they were pulling him forward. He climbed the steps slowly. 3 wooden planks, warped and groaning under his weight. The porch sagged to the left. A rocking chair sat in the corner, motionless, covered in a layer of pollen thick enough to write in. He thought, absurdly, that someone should clean that. He thought, absurdly, that someone used to sit there. His hand reached for the doorknob before his mind caught up. The lock turned with a low scrape, metal on metal, reluctant. The door didn't swing open. It resisted. He had to push, shoulder against wood, breath held. And then it gave, sudden and rough, like the house had been holding its breath too. The smell hit him first. Dust. Rot. Something underneath that made his throat tighten. Not decay exactly, but age. The scent of 30 years settling into wallpaper and floorboards and the cracks between. Garian stepped into the entryway and stopped. The mirror was waiting. It stood across from the door, just as he'd glimpsed through the window, taller than he remembered. The frame was dark wood, carved with vines and leaves that twisted into themselves, intricate and obsessive. The glass was clouded, smudged, covered in a fine layer of dust that softened the reflection like gauze over a lens. And in that reflection, Garian stared. The man staring back was older than he felt. Lines around the eyes, gray threading through dark hair. Shoulders hunched in a way he hadn't noticed before. He looked tired. He looked like someone who'd been running and had finally stopped because there was nowhere left to go. He blinked. The reflection blinked back, but something about it felt delayed. Just a fraction of a second, like the mirror had to think about it first. Garian exhaled slowly and turned away. The hallway stretched in front of him, narrow and dim. The wallpaper was faded, pale blue with white flowers, now yellowed at the edges and peeling near the ceiling. The floorboards were scuffed, scratched, dark with age. To his left, the staircase climbed into shadow. To his right, an open doorway led to what he thought might be the living room. He didn't move. His hand was still on the door frame, 1 foot inside, 1 foot on the porch. He stood there, suspended, caught between the world outside and the world waiting inside Verith House. A memory flickered, unbidden, sudden, bright as a camera flash. He was 7, maybe 8. Running down this hallway, bare feet slapping against wood, laughter bubbling up from his chest. Someone was chasing him, not scary, playful. A voice calling his name, warm and musical, echoing off the walls. Garian. Slow down. You'll fall. The memory dissolved. The hallway was silent. No laughter. No footsteps. Just the faint hum of the highway in the distance and the settling creak of old wood adjusting to his weight. Garian took a breath, shallow, careful, and stepped fully inside. The door swung shut behind him, not slammed, not blown by wind, just closed. The sound echoed through the house, soft and final, like the house had been waiting for him to commit. Like it had been holding its breath. And now, finally, he could exhale. What? Garian stood in the dim entryway, keys still clutched in his palm, and stared at the dust motes suspended in the amber light, filtering through the warped glass. They didn't move. They hung there, weightless, frozen, like the air itself had stopped. Garian moved, through the ground floor like someone cataloging wreckage. He dragged his suitcase behind him. A single black roller bag, scuffed at the corners, half empty. It scraped across the hardwood, loud in the stillness, and he winced at the sound. Too intrusive, too certain. He set it down in the center of the living room, handle extended, and stepped back. The gesture felt tentative, like claiming a space he wasn't sure he had the right to occupy. The living room stretched around him, larger than he remembered, or maybe just emptier. The furniture was still there, covered in pale sheets that had yellowed with time. A sofa, 2 armchairs, a coffee table with one leg shorter than the others, propped up with a folded piece of cardboard that had fossilized into place. The walls were bare except for rectangles of slightly darker paint where frames used to hang. He walked to the mantel above the fireplace. Dust coated everything, thick, soft, undisturbed. His finger left a clean line through it, dark wood gleaming underneath. And there, half buried in the layer of years, were 3 picture frames. Garian picked up the first one carefully, wiped the glass with his sleeve. A family portrait. Himself at 7, maybe 8. Standing between 2 people he recognized only because he'd been told they were his parents. Alora on his left, smiling, one hand resting on his shoulder. Romir on his right, taller, broader, face angled slightly away from the camera. The boy in the middle, small, dark-haired, grinning, looked like a stranger. Garian stared at the photograph. He didn't remember this day. Not the clothes he was wearing, not the room behind them, not the reason they'd taken the picture in the first place. His mother's smile was wide, genuine. His father's jaw was tight, and the boy between them looked happy. Garian set the frame back on the mantel, carefully, as though it might shatter. He moved through the rest of the ground floor methodically. Kitchen. Cabinets hanging open. A single mug still sitting in the sink, handle cracked. Dining room. Table pushed against the wall. Chairs stacked in the corner. Bathroom. Small, windowless. The mirror above the sink clouded with age. He stopped in the doorway of the bathroom. The mirror caught his reflection. Dim, hazy, softened by dust and poor lighting. He looked at himself for 3 seconds, maybe 4. His reflection looked back. Inak. And then it blinked. Not with him. A beat after. Garian's breath caught. He stepped closer, squinting, searching for the trick. A shadow. A smudge on the glass. Exhaustion playing games with his vision. The reflection was normal now. Perfectly synchronized. Tired eyes. Unshaven jaw. The same man who'd stood in front of the entryway mirror 20 minutes ago. He exhaled slowly, scrubbed a hand over his face. Jet lag. Emotional overload. Buying your childhood home after 30 years of pretending it didn't exist. Pengu, that did things to a person's perception. We turned away. Back in the living room, he pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen was bright, harsh against the dimness of the house. He scrolled through his contacts, hesitated, then pressed the name at the top. Mira. His daughter. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. Her voice, clipped, efficient, the same tone she used for the work calls. Kutu asked him to leave a message. He opened his mouth, closed it. The silence stretched. He hung up without speaking. The phone felt heavier than it should. He slipped it back into his pocket and stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by sheeted furniture and dust and the fading light filtering through windows he hadn't opened yet. The house creaked, not the sound of settling, not the groan of old wood adjusting to temperature shifts. This was deliberate, purposeful. A floorboard somewhere upstairs, then another, then silence. Garian looked at the ceiling. No one was up there. He knew that. But the house didn't feel empty. He moved to the window, pulled back the heavy curtain. Outside, the hedges were dark silhouettes against the fading sky. The driveway was empty. The street beyond was quiet. No cars, no movement, just the distant hum of the highway, like a held breath. The light was wrong. When he'd arrived, it had been mid-afternoon. Golden. Warm. Now the sun was sinking fast, the sky bruising purple and gray, shadows stretching long and thin across the overgrown lawn. He checked his phone. 6:47. That wasn't right. He'd been inside maybe an hour and a half tops. The sun shouldn't be setting yet. Garian turned back to the room. The living room was darker now, corners pooling with shadow. The mirror above the fireplace, he hadn't noticed it before, reflected the window behind him. The dying light, the pale sheets draped over furniture, like ghosts waiting to be acknowledged. And his reflection, standing in the center of the room, staring back. He looked away quickly. His hand found the banister at the base of the staircase. The wood was smooth, worn, the grain soft under his palm. Cold, too. Colder than the air around him. He gripped it tighter, testing the weight of the stairs, the stability. The house creaked again. This time it was closer, directly above him. Garian looked up the staircase. It climbed into darkness, the second floor invisible from where he stood. He thought about going up, checking the rooms, making sure the house was truly empty. But he didn't move. Instead, he glanced to his left. The bathroom door still open, the mirror inside catching slivers of fading light. Then to his right, the living room mirror above the mantel, angled just enough to see him standing at the base of the stairs. He realized suddenly how many mirrors there were. Entryway, bathroom, living room. He hadn't checked the kitchen yet, or the dining room. or upstairs, and none of them, not a single one, was covered in dust. Yeah, everything else in the house was thick with it. The mantel, the furniture, the windowsills, even the picture frames had been buried. But the mirrors, clean, pristine, like someone had been polishing them. Garien's grip on the banister tightened. He pulled his hand away, wiped his palm on his jeans. A cold draft slipped through the house, not from the windows, not from the door, from somewhere deeper, somewhere he couldn't see. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old wood and something else now, something sweeter, floral maybe, or perfume left too long in a closed room. He picked up his suitcase, handle clicking into place, and set it beside the couch. A gesture of tentative claiming, or surrender, he wasn't sure which. The light outside was almost gone now. The house was filling with shadows, pooling in corners, creeping across the floor. Garien stood in the center of the living room and listened, creaking upstairs. The distant hum of the highway, his own breathing, shallow and careful. And underneath it all, so faint he almost missed it, the sound of something shifting. Not footsteps, not wind, just movement, like the house was adjusting, like it was settling into the fact that he was here. Garien turned toward the staircase. The darkness at the top felt heavier now, watchful. He climbed the first step, then the second. He kept his eyes forward, focused on the railing, the stairs, the landing above. He didn't look at the mirrors, not the one in the bathroom to his left, not the one in the living room behind him, not the one he knew was waiting in the entryway, tall and silent, watching him climb. He just kept moving, up, into the dark. The second-floor hallway was darker than it should have been. Garien stood at the top of the stairs, one hand still on the railing, and stared into the narrow corridor that stretched ahead. 4 doors, all closed. The wallpaper up here was different. Pale green with thin gold lines, water-stained near the ceiling, peeling in long strips that curled like dried leaves. And at the far end of the hallway, another mirror. Tall, rectangular, positioned so perfectly that it caught his silhouette the moment he stepped onto the landing. He didn't look at it directly. Not yet. Instead, he moved to the first door on his right. The wood was warped, swollen at the edges, and it took effort to push it open. The hinges groaned. A long, low sound that echoed through the hallway like a warning. His childhood bedroom. Garien stepped inside and stopped. It was exactly as he'd left it. The bed was still made, pale blue comforter pulled tight, pillows arranged against the headboard. Model airplanes hung from the ceiling on fishing line, suspended in permanent flight, wings dusty but intact. Posters clung to the walls, edges curled and yellowed. A baseball player mid-swing, a movie he didn't remember watching, a map of constellations with glow-in-the-dark stars that had long since stopped glowing. The room felt smaller than he remembered, not metaphorically, physically, like the walls had moved inward while he was gone. Garien crossed to the bed, sat down carefully. The springs creaked under his weight, a sound so familiar it hurt. He used to bounce on this bed, used to build forts with the blankets, used to lie awake at night counting the model airplanes, naming them, imagining where they'd fly if they were real. He didn't remember any of that. He knew it. The way you know facts from a history book, but he didn't remember it. His gaze drifted to the dresser against the far wall, and above it, a mirror, oval, wooden frame, tilted slightly downward, angled to catch whoever stood in front of the dresser. Garien stood slowly, crossed the room, stopped 3 feet from the glass. His reflection stared back, tired, older, shoulders hunched, and then the reflection changed, not gradually, not like a fade or a flicker, just changed. The man in the mirror was gone. In his place stood a boy, 9 years old, maybe 10, dark hair falling into his eyes, wearing a striped shirt Garion didn't recognize, standing in the same spot, same angle, same room, but small, young, staring directly at him with eyes that were too steady, too knowing. Garion stumbled backward. His shoulder hit the doorframe. His breath caught in his chest, sharp and painful. He blinked. The reflection was normal again. Himself, 47 years old, gray threading through his hair, lines around his eyes. No boy, no child staring back with eyes that shouldn't know what they knew. Garion pressed his palm against his chest, felt his heartbeat hammering under his ribs. Exhaustion, grief, jet lag, the weight of buying a house he should have burned down 30 years ago. That's all it was, but he couldn't move. He stood in the doorway of his childhood bedroom, staring at the mirror, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. The reflection stayed normal, perfectly synchronized. Just a man standing in an empty room, holding his breath, waiting for ghosts. And yet, he wanted to see it again. The thought surprised him, disturbed him, but it was true. He wanted the boy to come back. Garion turned away, forced himself into the hallway. The air was colder out here, thinner. He could hear the house settling around him. Floorboards creaking in rooms he hadn't entered, the scrape of something shifting. A sound like furniture being dragged across wood. But when he looked, nothing moved. The hallway mirror at the far end caught his reflection as he walked. He kept his eyes forward, focused on the next door, the bathroom. He pushed it open, flicked the light switch. Nothing happened. The bulb was dead, or the power was off. He couldn't remember if Cien had mentioned utilities. Moonlight filtered through a small window above the toilet, pale and cold. Enough to see by. Enough to make out the sink, the tub, the mirror above the sink. Garion stepped inside. The mirror was fogged, not from steam, just clouded, like someone had breathed on it, and the condensation had never cleared. He wiped his hand across the glass. His reflection appeared. Distorted, stretched, wrong. And behind him, in the doorway, a flicker of movement. Small, child height, gone before he could turn around. Garion spun, heart pounding. The doorway was empty. He stepped back into the hallway, pulse loud in his ears. The air smelled different now, sweeter, floral, jasmine and vanilla. His mother's perfume. He hadn't smelled that in 30 years. Garion walked down the hallway slowly, testing each floorboard, listening for sounds that shouldn't be there. He opened the hallway closet. Narrow, shallow, crammed with boxes and plastic bins. And there, on the top shelf, a cardboard box labeled in faded marker, Garion, toys. He pulled it down, set it on the floor, opened the flaps, model cars, action figures, a wooden train set, pieces still connected, gathering dust. A stuffed bear with one button eye missing. He didn't remember any of it, but someone had kept it, packed it, saved it, waiting for him to come back. Garion closed the box, left it in the hallway. He moved to the mirror at the end of the corridor. The tall one, the one that had been watching him since he reached the second floor. He stopped in front of it, looked. His reflection looked back, and then, in the peripheral edge of the glass, movement. Not him. Someone else. A boy. Grinning, waving. Not the boy from the bedroom mirror. This one was different. Lighter hair, freckles across his nose, wearing a red jacket Garion recognized but couldn't name. Kyle. The name surfaced from somewhere deep, somewhere he'd buried it. Kyle Orin, his best friend, the kid who lived 2 houses down, the kid who'd moved away when Garion was 11 and never came back. Garion's breath fogged the glass. The boy in the reflection grinned wider, waved again, and then faded, like smoke, like memory. Garion pressed his forehead against the mirror. The glass was cold, solid, real. But the boy had been there. He'd seen him. He dropped to his knees in front of the mirror, hands flat against the floor, staring into the glass like it was a window into another room. Another time. The reflection showed the hallway behind him, empty, quiet. But if he waited, if he stayed here long enough, maybe it would show him something else. Maybe it would show him more. He knelt there, silent, barely breathing, watching the glass the way you watch water for ripples. And slowly, so slowly he almost missed it. The hallway in the reflection began to change. The wallpaper was brighter. The doors were open. The light was warmer, golden, like a late afternoon sun. And from somewhere downstairs, faint but unmistakable, laughter. A child's laughter. His own. Garion's hands curled into fists. The mirrors weren't broken. They weren't malfunctioning. They were remembering. And they were inviting him to remember too. He stood slowly, legs shaking, and turned toward the stairs. He needed to check the other mirrors. All of them. He needed to see what else they knew. Garion moved through the house like a man possessed. Kitchen first. The mirror above the sink. Small, square, framed in chipped white paint. He stood in front of it, hands gripping the edge of the counter, staring into the glass. For 10 seconds, nothing. Then, a flicker. Not his reflection. A woman, younger than he'd ever known her, standing at the stove, back turned, one hand stirring something in a pot. Humming. The melody was faint, distorted, like it was traveling through water. Elora, his mother. Garion's breath caught. She turned slightly, just enough for him to see her profile, the curve of her cheek, the way her hair fell across her shoulder. She was smiling. And then she was gone. The mirror showed only him again, pale, wide-eyed, hands white-knuckled on the counter. He stumbled backward, shoulder hitting the refrigerator. The sound echoed through the empty kitchen. Too loud, too sharp. His mother had been there. Not a memory, not a hallucination. She'd been in the mirror. Garion turned and ran. Through the kitchen, through the dining room. He stopped in front of the mirror above the sideboard. Rectangular, beveled edges. Glass clouded with age. He pressed his palms flat against it. Cold, solid, real. He waited. The reflection stayed normal. Just him. Just the empty dining room behind him. Chairs stacked in the corner. Table pushed against the wall. But if he waited long enough. If he stayed still, the air in the room shifted. The light changed. Warmer. Golden. And in the mirror the dining room filled. The table was centered. Chairs arranged around it. Plates set. Glasses half full. A family dinner. Elora at one end. Romir at the other. And between them, a boy with dark hair, swinging his legs under the table, grinning at something his mother said. Garion watched himself as a child. Watched his mother laugh. Watched his father's jaw tighten. Watched him set down his fork with too much force. The scene dissolved. The mirror returned to normal. Garion pulled his hands away. They were trembling. One more. The master bedroom. He hadn't been inside since he'd arrived. Hadn't even opened the door. Now, standing at the end of the upstairs hallway, he stared at the closed door like it was the entrance to something he couldn't take back. He reached for the handle. The metal was ice cold under his palm. He pushed. The door swung open slowly, hinges groaning, and the air that spilled out was wrong. Heavier. Thicker. Like stepping into a room that had been holding its breath for 30 years. The master bedroom was massive. Larger than he remembered. Larger than it should be. The bed dominated the center. King-sized, four-poster, covered in a pale duvet that had yellowed with time. The windows were draped in heavy curtains, drawn shut, blocking out the moonlight. The only illumination came from the hallway, behind him, spilling weakly into the room, catching on dust motes suspended in the air. And on the far wall, the mirror. Garian stopped breathing. It was huge, floor to ceiling, ornate gold frame carved with intricate patterns. Leaves, vines, flowers twisted into themselves. The glass was pristine, untouched by dust, reflecting the room with perfect clarity, reflecting him, standing in the doorway, staring. He took a step inside, then another. The floorboards didn't creak. The air didn't move. It was like the room was waiting. Garian approached the mirror slowly, eyes locked on his reflection. It moved with him, perfectly synchronized. Normal. But behind him, in the doorway, a figure. Garian spun around. No one there, just the empty hallway, the pale green wallpaper, the closed doors. He turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, standing in the doorway of the reflected room. Not the real one. A woman, young, mid-30s, wearing a blue dress, the same one from the photograph downstairs. Elora, his mother. She stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of her, staring directly at him through the glass. Garian's legs nearly gave out. He stumbled forward, hands reaching for the mirror, palms pressing flat against the cold surface. "Mom!" The word cracked in his throat. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. And then her lips moved, slow, deliberate. She was saying something. Garian leaned closer, forehead almost touching the glass, trying to read her lips. "I'm sorry. No. I love you. No." Look, the mirror vibrated under his palms, faint, like a hum buried deep in the glass. Elora's reflection flickered, her hand lifted, pointing, not at him, at something behind him. Garian turned. The dresser, dark wood, 3 drawers, a small jewelry box sitting on top, dust-free, polished, like someone had just set it there. He crossed the room slowly. His heartbeat was too loud. His hands were shaking. The jewelry box was wooden, carved with the same intricate patterns as the mirror frame. The latch was tarnished but intact. He lifted the lid. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was a single folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, creased, fragile. Garian picked it up carefully, unfolded it with trembling fingers. His mother's handwriting, looping, elegant. The ink slightly smudged in places, like she'd been crying when she wrote it. "My dearest Garian, if you're reading this, you came back. I always hoped you would. I need you to know I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I had no choice. Your father, he loved you, in his way, but he loved control more. And when I told him I couldn't stay, when I told him I needed to take you with me, he said no. We fought. In this room. In front of this mirror. I begged him. I told him you deserved better than the silence he was building around you. But he wouldn't hear it. He said if I left alone. So I did. I came back, Garian, so many times. I stood outside this house in the rain, in the snow, in the summer heat. I called. I wrote letters. He sent them all back unopened. And then one day I stopped. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I realized you'd already learned not to remember me. He'd taught you that. I left pieces of myself everywhere. I loved you. In the mirrors, in the walls, in the rooms where I held you and sang to you and promised I'd never let go. If you ever come back, look in the mirrors. They'd remember when you couldn't. I love you. I have always loved you." Mom Garian's hands shook so hard the letter fluttered. His vision blurred. His throat closed. He sank onto the bed, letter clutched in his fist, and the springs groaned under his weight. The same sound they'd made 30 years ago when his mother sat here, writing these words, knowing her son might never read them. He looked up at the mirror. Elora was still there, standing in the doorway of the reflected room, watching him. Her hand lifted, pressed flat against the glass from the other side. Garion stood, stumbled forward, pressed his palm against the mirror where hers rested. The glass was ice cold, vibrating, alive. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I forgot you." Her reflection smiled, sad, gentle. And then she faded, slowly, like smoke dissolving into air, until the mirror showed only him, alone, tears streaming down his face and the empty master bedroom behind him. Garion collapsed back onto the bed, letter still clutched in his fist, staring at the mirror where his mother's reflection had been. The room was silent. The house was silent. But for the first time in 30 years, Garion Tove remembered. Garion couldn't stop moving. He left the master bedroom with the letter folded in his pocket. His mother's words pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat. He moved through the house mirror to mirror, hands trembling, eyes burning, searching for more proof, more memory, more pieces of the woman who'd left herself in the glass. The bathroom mirror on the first floor showed him nothing at first, just his own reflection. Pale, hollow-eyed, unraveling. He pressed his palms flat against the surface, waited. The glass fogged under his breath, and then the reflection changed. Not him. A boy, 10 years old, standing in this same bathroom, staring at himself in the mirror with eyes too old for his face. And behind him, a man, tall, broad-shouldered, one hand resting on the boy's shoulder, grip firm, possessive. Romir, his father. Garion watched, frozen, as his father leaned down, mouth close to the boy's ear. He couldn't hear the words, but he could read his father's lips. "She's gone. Don't ask again." The boy in the mirror nodded. Small, obedient. He didn't cry. He just accepted. The scene dissolved. Garion stumbled backward, shoulder hitting the doorframe. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. He tasted copper. Salt. He'd bitten through his lip without realizing. Hewitt wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, smearing red across his knuckles, and kept moving. The dining room mirror, the entryway mirror, the mirror in his childhood bedroom. Each one showed him something he'd buried, his 10th birthday, sitting at the dining room table, cake with candles. His father across from him, silent, staring at the empty chair where his mother should have been. Young Garion blowing out the candles, making a wish he'd already learned not to say aloud the day she left, standing at the front door, watching through the window as a car pulled away. His father's hand on his shoulder, pulling him back. She didn't want us anymore. And the boy, small, confused, nodding, believing. The weeks after, the months, the years. Each mirror showed a different version of himself. 12, 13, 16. Each one more detached, more willing to accept the lie. Each one learning, slowly, that forgetting was easier than remembering. That silence was safer than questions. Garion sank to his knees in front of the hallway mirror on the second floor. The same one where he'd seen Kale, where the wallpaper had brightened, and the doors had opened and the house had remembered warmth. Now it showed only him, kneeling, broken. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The reflection didn't answer. "I'm sorry I stopped looking for you." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry I believed him." The mirror stayed silent. Just glass. Just a man on his knees, talking to ghosts. But the truth settled into his chest, cold and heavy and undeniable. The house remembered because he had refused to. His father had given him a choice, Not explicitly, not with words, but with silence and grip, and the slow, deliberate erasure of a woman who'd loved her son enough to leave pieces of herself in every room. And Garianne had chosen forgetting, not out of malice, not out of cruelty, but because remembering meant admitting he'd lost her twice. Once when she left, once when he stopped looking for her in every room. He sat back on his heels, wiping his face with shaking hands. The letter was still in his pocket. He pulled it out, unfolded it carefully, read it again. I left pieces of myself everywhere I loved you. They remember when you couldn't. Garianne pressed the letter to his chest and closed his eyes. He thought about all the years he'd spent not asking questions, not reaching out, not wondering if his mother had tried to come back, not considering that the silence his father built wasn't grief. It was guilt. He thought about his daughter, Mira, how easily he'd let her slip away too, how quickly he'd stopped calling when she didn't answer, how familiar the pattern was. Silence as safety, distance as survival. He'd learned it young, and he'd carried it his whole life. I thought I'd forgotten her because time does that. Makes us smaller, makes the past feel like someone else's life. But the truth is, I chose not to remember, because remembering meant admitting I'd lost her twice. Once when she left, once when I stopped looking for her in every room. The words sat in his chest, heavy and true. He looked up at the hallway mirror, at his reflection, older now, tired, but no longer running. If you've ever carried a silence that heavy, subscribe. Sometimes the stories we bury are the ones that need to breathe the most. Garianne folded the letter, slipped it back into his pocket, and stood slowly. The house was dark now, full dark. No moonlight, no streetlights filtering through warped glass. Just shadows and mirrors and the weight of 30 years pressing down. He moved through the hallway, down the stairs, into the living room. 11 mirrors. He'd counted them. Kitchen, dining room, bathrooms, bedrooms, hallways, entryway. 11 surfaces that had watched him grow, watched him forget, watched him leave, and now watched him come back. Garianne sat on the sheeted couch in the living room. He didn't turn on the lights, didn't pull back the curtains, just sat in the darkness, surrounded by glass, and let the memories come. His mother humming in the kitchen, his mother reading to him before bed, his mother kneeling in front of him, whispering, "I love you," 7 times before she walked out the door. His father's hand on his shoulder, heavy, final. Don't ask again. And himself, 10 years old, learning that love could be erased if you just stopped saying its name. The mirrors didn't show him anything now. They didn't need to. He remembered all of it. The good, the loss, the lie, the complicity. Garianne sat in the dark for a long time. Minutes, maybe hours. Time felt strange in Varath House, compressed, stretched, like the walls were breathing. Finally he stood, crossed the living room, climbed the stairs, walked to the master bedroom. The door was still open. The massive mirror on the far wall reflected nothing but darkness, and the faint outline of his silhouette in the doorway. Garianne stepped inside, approached the mirror, pressed both palms flat against the cold glass, and said aloud, into the silence, "Show me everything." The mirror hummed, faint, low, like a frequency buried deep in the glass. Garianne didn't move. He waited. And the house, finally, answered. The mirror answered, not slowly, not gently. It erupted. The glass blazed with light, not reflected, not external, but from within. And the master bedroom dissolved around Garianne. The walls blurred. The floor vanished. There was only the mirror, massive and alive, and the memories pouring out of it, like floodwater breaking through a dam. Garian staggered backward, hands still pressed against the glass. It was warm now. Not cold, not neutral. Warm. Like skin, like breath. And in the reflection, everything. The room filled with overlapping images. Not sequential, not orderly. All at once. Layered, simultaneous. Elora standing by the dresser, folding clothes into a suitcase. Her hands shaking, her face wet with tears. Romir in the doorway, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes hard. Young Garian, 10 years old, small, confused, standing between them, looking from one parent to the other, trying to understand why the air felt like it was suffocating him. Garian pressed his forehead against the mirror, breath fogging the glass, and watched. Elora turned to Romir, suitcase half-packed, voice trembling. I can't stay here anymore. Not like this. Her voice was faint, distorted, like it was traveling through water. But Garian heard it. Every word. Romir didn't move. Then go. I'm taking him with me. No. The word was flat. Final. Elora's face crumpled. She crossed the room, reached for young Garian's hand. Baby, pack a bag. We're leaving. The boy looked up at his father. Romir stepped forward, hand landing heavy on his son's shoulder, pulling him back, away from his mother. You're not taking him. Elora's voice broke. He's my son, and you're abandoning him. I'm not. Her breath hitched. I'm trying to save him from this, from your silence, from the way you've turned this house into a tomb. Romir's grip tightened on young Garian's shoulder. The boy winced but didn't pull away. If you leave, Romir said, voice low and cold, you leave alone. Elora stared at him, then at her son. Her face was pale, shaking. She dropped to her knees in front of a young Garian, hands cupping his face. I love you, she whispered. I love you. I love you. 7 times, Garian counted. 7 times she said it. Voice breaking, tears streaming, hands trembling against her son's cheeks. And the boy, small, scared, confused, just stared. He didn't say it back. He didn't understand what was happening. Elora kissed his forehead, stood, grabbed her suitcase. She walked to the door, stopped, turned back, looked at her son one last time, and then she left. Garian watched her disappear down the hallway, watched her glance back once, twice, 3 times, watched her sob as she descended the stairs, watched the front door open, watched her step into the night, and then the scene shifted. Romir turned to young Garian, crouched down, eye level. She didn't want us anymore. The boy's lip trembled. Where did she go? Away. Is she coming back? Romir's hand settled on his son's shoulder again, firm, possessive. No, but don't ask again. And young Garian, 10 years old, small, already learning the shape of silence, nodded. He nodded. And Garian, 47 years old, standing in the master bedroom with his forehead pressed against the mirror, screamed. You lied! His voice shattered the stillness, echoed through the empty house, tore through 30 years of silence. You made me forget her. You made me think she didn't want me. The mirror flickered. The images blurred. But they didn't stop. Another memory surfaced. Young Garian, 12 now, standing at his bedroom window, staring down at the street. A woman standing on the sidewalk, staring up at the house. Elora. She looked older, thinner. Her hair was shorter, but it was her. She stood there for 5 minutes. 10, 15, waiting. Young Garian saw her, recognized her, and turned away. Pulled the curtain closed, went back to his homework. Garian's knees buckled. No, he whispered. No, I didn't. But he had. He'd seen her, and he'd turned away, because his father had taught him that remembering hurt. that asking questions meant breaking something fragile, that silence was safety. The mirror shifted again. Elora standing outside Verith house in the rain, soaked, shivering, staring up at the window of Garion's childhood bedroom. She didn't knock. She didn't call out. She just stood there, and then she left. The image repeated. Different seasons, different years. Spring, summer, fall, winter. She came back. Over and over. She never stopped. She just stopped being let in. Garion collapsed against the mirror, forehead pressed to the glass, hands splayed, sobbing. "I'm so sorry," he choked out. "Mom, I'm so sorry." The warmth in the glass pulsed, like a heartbeat. "I didn't know. I thought you'd left. I thought you didn't want me." His voice broke. I believed him. I'm so sorry I believed him. The mirror dimmed. The overlapping images faded, one by one, until there was only one left. Elora, young, smiling, standing in the master bedroom doorway, wearing the blue dress, looking directly at him, her hand lifted, pressed flat against the glass. Garion mirrored the gesture, palm to palm, separated by nothing but time and glass, and 30 years of silence. "I know," she seemed to say, though no words came. "I know." And then she faded, slowly, gently, until the mirror showed only Garion, alone, broken, tears streaming down his face, but no longer running, no longer forgetting. He slid down the mirror, back against the glass, and sat on the floor of the master bedroom. His chest heaved, his throat burned, his hands shook. But for the first time in 30 years, Garion Tove felt the full weight of what he'd lost, and he let himself grieve it. Not the sanitized version his father had fed him, not the lie he'd been taught to carry, the truth. His mother had loved him. She had fought for him. She had come back, and he, small, scared, trained into silence, had let her go. Not because he didn't love her, but because he'd learned that loving her meant breaking the only safety he had left. Garion sat on the floor, surrounded by the walls that had watched it all, and whispered into the silence, "I remember you now, Mom. I remember." The house settled around him, quiet, still. The mirror reflected nothing but an empty room and a man who'd finally stopped running from the past. And somewhere, in the walls, in the glass, in the spaces between memory and forgetting, Elora heard him. Garion woke to the sound of rain. Soft, steady, drumming against the windows like fingertips asking permission to enter. He was still on the floor of the master bedroom, back against the mirror, legs stretched out in front of him. His neck ached, his eyes burned. The letter was still clutched in his hand, creased and damp with sweat. Morning light filtered through the curtains. Pale, gray, muted by the storm outside. He'd slept. He didn't remember falling asleep. Garion shifted, groaning as his spine protested. He pushed himself upright, using the mirror for support, and stood slowly. His reflection stared back, exhausted, hollow-eyed, but steady. Just him. No child, no mother, no father. Just Garion Tove, 47 years old, standing in the master bedroom of the house where he'd learned to forget. He touched the mirror with his fingertips, traced the ornate frame. The carved vines and leaves twisted into themselves. The glass was cold again, not warm, not pulsing, just glass. The mirrors were done. Their job was finished. Garion folded the letter carefully, slipped it into his pocket, and left the room. The house felt different now, lighter, like something heavy had been lifted from the walls. The air didn't press as hard. The shadows didn't cling. He moved through the hallway, down the stairs, into the bathroom on the first floor. The mirror above the sink reflected him, tired, unshaven, but present. No flickering images, no delayed blinks, just a man who needed a shower. Garyan turned on the water, waited for it to heat, and stepped under the stream. The pressure was weak, the pipes groaning, but the water was hot. He stood there for a long time, letting it wash over him, watching the steam cloud the glass shower door. When he finally stepped out, the bathroom mirror was fogged. He wiped it clear with his palm. His reflection looked back, normal, whole. He dressed in the same clothes he'd worn yesterday, jeans, a gray shirt, both wrinkled and smelling faintly of dust. He'd left his suitcase in the living room. He should unpack, settle in. But he wasn't ready yet. First, he needed to sit, to breathe, to let the weight of the last 24 hours settle into something he could carry. Garyan made coffee in the kitchen. The machine was old, sputtering and hissing, but it worked. The smell filled the small space. Bitter, familiar, grounding. He poured a cup, added nothing, and carried it to the living room. The sheeted furniture loomed around him. He pulled the sheet off the couch, folded it, set it aside, sat down. The springs groaned under his weight. Outside the rain continued, soft, persistent. Garyan sipped his coffee and stared at the window. The hedges were dark with water. The driveway was slick. The street beyond was empty. He pulled his phone from his pocket, stared at the screen. Mira, his daughter. He'd tried calling her yesterday. She hadn't answered. He pressed her name, held the phone to his ear. One ring, two. She answered. Dad? Her voice was cautious, surprised. Garyan exhaled slowly. Hi, sweetheart. A pause. Is everything okay? Yeah, I'm at the house. The house? My childhood home. I bought it. Silence on the other end. Then, you bought it? Why? Garyan closed his eyes. I don't know. I thought I needed to come back. Mira didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was softer. Are you okay? I'm getting there. Another pause. Mira, Garyan said quietly, I need to tell you about your grandmother. Grandma Elora? Yeah. Dad, you never talk about her. I know. His throat tightened. That's the problem. The conversation was brief, careful. He didn't tell her everything. Not yet. Just enough. That his mother hadn't left willingly. That his father had lied. That he'd spent 30 years believing something that wasn't true. Mira listened, asked a few questions. Her voice was gentle, but distant, like she wasn't sure how to hold this new information. When they hung up, Garyan sat in the silence, phone resting on his knee, coffee cooling in his hand. It was a beginning, not a solution, not a fix, but a beginning. He finished his coffee, set the mug on the floor, stood. The mirrors. He'd counted them yesterday. 11. He couldn't live with 11 mirrors watching him. Garyan moved through the house systematically. Kitchen, dining room, bathrooms, bedrooms, hallways. He took them down one by one, carefully, respectfully. He wrapped each in old sheets he found in the linen closet, carried them down to the basement, set them in a neat row against the far wall. The basement was dark, cold, smelling of earth and old stone. He didn't linger. By late afternoon, the house felt bare, lighter. The walls showed pale rectangles where the mirrors had hung, ghosts of frames. Garyan stood in the entryway, staring at the last one, the tall mirror, ornate frame, the first one he'd seen when he'd returned. He left it, not because he was afraid to take it down, but because he wanted to remember, not obsessively, not destructively, just remember. He found vinegar under the kitchen sink, a stack of old newspapers in the recycling bin. He carried them to the entryway, knelt in front of the mirror, and started cleaning. The glass was dusty, smudged, clouded with 30 years of neglect. He wiped it carefully, methodically, polishing in small circles until the surface gleamed. His reflection emerged slowly, clearer, sharper, older, tired, but no longer running. Garion sat back on his heels, rag in hand, and stared at himself. He looked like his mother, around the eyes, the shape of his jaw. He'd never noticed that before. Or maybe he had, and he'd chosen not to see it. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle. The afternoon light was thin, gray, filtering through the warped glass of the front door. Garion stood, gathered the newspapers and vinegar, and walked through the house one last time. He touched the walls as he went, the banister, the door frames, the windowsills. The house had held so much. For so long. His mother's love, his father's silence, his own small, learned forgetting, and now it was just a house, a place where things had happened, a place where memory lived in the walls and the glass and the spaces between. But not a prison. Not anymore. Garion stopped in the master bedroom doorway. The massive mirror still hung on the far wall, reflecting the empty room. He didn't go inside. He just looked. "Thank you," he said quietly. To the house, to the mirrors, to his mother, wherever she was, to the part of himself that had finally stopped running. The house didn't answer. It didn't need to. Garion turned away, walked down the stairs, and stood in the entryway. His suitcase was still by the couch. His coffee mug was still on the living room floor. He'd clean tomorrow. Unpack. Start making the house livable. Tonight he just needed to rest. And remember. Not with the desperate, frantic searching of yesterday, but with the quiet, steady knowing that his mother had loved him. That she'd tried. That she'd left pieces of herself everywhere she'd loved him. And that the mirrors, silent now, ordinary now, had held those pieces until he was ready to see them. Garion locked the front door, turned off the lights, climbed the stairs. He paused in front of his childhood bedroom. The door was still open. The bed was still made. He stepped inside, lay down on the small bed. The springs creaked, and for the first time in 30 years, Garion Tove fell asleep in his childhood home. Not haunted, not running, just home. 3 months later, Garion Tove returned to Varath House on a Saturday afternoon in early autumn. The hedges were trimmed now. The porch no longer sagged. The shutters hung straight. Paint, soft cream, not the peeling yellow, covered the exterior walls, making the house look younger, cared for, like something worth keeping. Garion parked in the driveway, cut the engine, and sat for a moment. The passenger seat beside him was empty, but not for long. A second car pulled in behind his. Silver sedan, newer model, Mira. His daughter stepped out, sunglasses pushed up into her dark hair, and looked at the house with an expression Garion couldn't quite read. "This is it?" she asked. Garion nodded. "This is it." She walked up the driveway slowly, taking in the repaired porch, the fresh paint, the flower beds he'd planted along the walkway. Marigolds, lavender, his mother's favorites, according to the letter. "It's smaller than I thought it would be," Mira said. Garion smiled faintly. "It feels that way to me, too." He unlocked the front door. The lock turned smoothly now, no resistance, and stepped inside. The entryway smelled different. Fresh paint, cedar, open windows. The mirror was still there, tall, ornate. But now, beside it hung 2 frames. One held the letter, his mother's handwriting visible behind glass, protected, permanent. The other held a photograph, Elora, young, smiling, holding an infant in her arms. The baby's face was small, peaceful, eyes half closed. Garian. Mira stepped inside, stopped in front of the mirror and stared. Not at her reflection, at the photograph beside it. Is that? Your grandmother, Garian said quietly. And me. Mira leaned closer, studying Elora's face, the curve of her smile, the way her hand rested protectively on the baby's back. Do I look like her? Mira asked. Garian stepped beside his daughter, looked at the photograph, then at Mira's reflection in the mirror. You have her eyes, he said. Mira's throat moved. She didn't look away from the photograph. Why didn't you ever tell me about her? Garian exhaled slowly. Because I didn't remember her. Not really. I thought she'd left because she didn't want us. That's what I was told, and I believed it. And now? Now I know the truth. They stood in silence for a moment. The house was quiet around them. No creaking, no whispers, just the faint sound of birds outside and the soft settling of old wood finding peace. Come on, Garian said. I'll show you the rest. They moved through the house together, living room first. The furniture was uncovered now, the walls repainted. Light streamed through the windows, warm and golden. Garian told her stories as they walked. Small ones. Fragments the mirrors had given back. His mother humming in the kitchen while she cooked. The way she used to read to him before bed, doing different voices for every character. The time she planted a garden and he'd helped, digging holes with a plastic shovel, dirt under his fingernails for days. Mira listened, asked questions. Her voice was careful, but not distant. They climbed the stairs. Garian showed her his childhood bedroom. The model airplanes were gone now, packed away. But the posters were still there. The bed was still small. You slept here? Mira asked, sitting on the edge of the mattress. For 10 years. She looked around. It's strange, seeing where you grew up. Yeah, Garian said. It is. They walked through the rest of the second floor. The bathroom, the hallway, the master bedroom. Garian paused in the doorway. The massive mirror was still there. But it was just a mirror now, reflecting the room, the light, nothing more. Mira stepped inside, looked around. This was their room? Yeah. It's beautiful. Garian nodded. It was, in the daylight, with the curtains open, with the weight of 30 years lifted. They went back downstairs, out onto the porch. The rocking chair was still there, cleaned now, repainted. Garian had fixed the uneven boards, reinforced the railing. They sat side by side, Mira in the rocking chair, Garian on the top step. The sun was beginning to set. The sky was streaked with orange and pink. The street was quiet, peaceful. Why did you keep it? Mira asked. Garian looked at her. What? The house. Why didn't you just sell it? He considered the question, turned it over in his mind. Because some places don't let you go until you've let them in, he said finally. Mira rocked slowly, the chair creaking under her weight. What does that mean? Garian touched the porch railing. The wood was smooth, solid. I spent 30 years running from this place, from the memories, from the truth. I thought if I stayed away long enough, it would stop mattering. He paused, but it didn't. It just grew, like a weight I couldn't put down. And now? Now I'm not running. Mira nodded. Didn't say anything. They sat in the quiet for a long time, watching the light fade, watching the shadows stretch across the overgrown lawn. Finally, Mira stood. I should get going. I have a long drive. Garian stood too. Thanks for coming. She smiled. Small. Genuine. Thanks for telling me. She hugged him. Brief, careful, but real. And then she walked to her car, waved once, and drove away. Garian stood on the porch, watching her taillights disappear down the street. When she was gone, he turned back to the house. The front door was still open, the entryway visible, the mirror reflecting the fading light. He stepped inside one last time, stood in front of the mirror, looked at his reflection. Older, tired, but steady, whole. The photograph of his mother hung beside the glass, smiling, holding him. The letter was there too, proof of love, proof of loss. Garion touched the frame of the photograph gently. "I'm glad I came back," he whispered. The house was silent, but in the fading light, just for a moment, so brief he almost missed it, the mirror showed something else. A figure standing behind him. A woman, young, smiling, one hand resting on his shoulder. Elora. Garion's breath caught. He turned. No one there, just the empty entryway, the open door, the quiet house. He looked back at the mirror. His reflection stared back. Alone. But he smiled, because he'd seen her. Not a haunting, not a trick of the light, just her, saying goodbye. Or maybe hello. Garion locked the front door, checked the windows, pocketed the key. He stood on the porch for a moment, looking at the house. It was smaller now, less ominous, just a place where things had happened, where love had lived, where memory had been kept safe until he was ready to hold it. He walked to his car, started the engine, pulled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, Vareth House stood quiet in the twilight, no longer haunted, no longer forgotten, just a house that remembered. And sometimes Garion thought that was enough.